My name is Clement Chu, and I am Chinese Canadian, but my parents are from Hong Kong, and my wife is from Taiwan. So I think that that gives me kind of a good perspective in terms of like what it actually means to be both Canadian and different aspects of Chinese. What I do is I'm currently working in the telecommunications industry, but my passions lie in my nonprofit. So I work with the Canadian Chinese Youth Athletic Association, which is a nonprofit that I founded with my friends in 1995, and currently I serve as the president of that organization. So we are inside the CCYAA Center for Athletic Performance, which is I guess an activity hub that we built in Markham, because it is a lot of our target demographic lives here. But the intention of this space is to allow young people to not just kind of grow themselves physically through activity, but also to be able to learn other things such as coding and art and things like that. And I think that when we're able to bring them all together into one specific space and deliver the programming and the subject matter in a manner that we want to do, I think that that's what really excites us and sets us apart. And we have a lot of things coming up in the near future, but this is sort of in the plan.
Can you tell us what your favorite traditional dish is and why?
Yeah, my favorite traditional dish would probably be Korean instant noodles with spam, egg, and cheese on top with dumplings. And why that is a favorite dish of mine is because where I grew up in North York in Toronto is that I was surrounded by people of different Asian heritages. I had a lot of Korean friends, I had a lot of Chinese friends, I had a lot of Filipino friends. And so this dish is sort of a melding of, all the things that they cared about and the things that were available in the closets of our parents. So when we were hungry and everybody comes over to someone's house, this is the dish that we'd throw together, and it brings back a lot of good childhood memories.
Do you have a memorable tradition that you love?
In terms of a memorable tradition that I love from specifically our Chinese heritage would be the things that we do on Chinese New Year. So specifically, one of the customs that we have is that we would give red pocket envelopes to people who are children, and in it there'd be money. So on the receiving end of it, when you're young, it's great to get money. But on the flip side of it, once you get older, it's great to see kids receiving the money from you, but it's really neat to see what they actually do with the money, because you actually have to spend it. You're not supposed to save it. And so it's really fun to see, kids kind of going out to the stores on Chinese New Year and seeing what toys they're going to pick or what clothing they're going to pick. And I think that that's a very fun part of the traditions.
Was there something that you would specifically buy as a kid?
Yeah, when I was younger, I think that the dollar amounts that we were getting were a lot lower, but we would buy things like candy and stuff like that. But I think that in this generation, we've been blessed where a lot of kids are looking towards things like video games and cool clothes and stuff like that, which is also why you'll see in a lot of retails and stores, there's just been a real elevated movement in terms of more focus on Chinese New Year, similar to things like Diwali, is that they see it as an opportunity that people and consumers are buying things. And so as a result, it's another festival where they can sell products. And it's good in the sense that they are now tailoring and creating specific products for the culture. And I think that that is another way that young people can learn about their background, because they're not just buying a regular Roots t-shirt, they're buying a Roots Chinese New Year t-shirt, and it happens to have a dragon on it. And they can ask, well, why does it have a dragon on it? And I think that that is part of that storytelling that we would want to do, for the next generation.
What's the most interesting myth or legend, cultural myth or legend that you know?
So there's a bunch of different cultural myths or legends that exist in sort of in Asian cultures. Like a lot of my Korean friends would say that you can't have a fan going on in your room with a closed door because you might die. We'd have other things like our Chinese parents saying, oh, don't go to sleep with wet hair because you're going to get a headache, or don't cut your hair on Chinese New Year because you're going to cut away all your luck. Well, that doesn't really work for me. But there's a lot of these superstitions that exist, in the community and in our heritage, which I'm always curious about what the genesis of these things are. but it often brings sort of hilarity and fun to the new generation to kind of look back on that. But there's stories, and I think that's the thing. Like over the course of time, there are probably some things that have great validity, such as Eastern medicine, acupuncture, and things like that. But then there's also other things that are borderline, witchcraft or fairy tales, and it's a lot of fun to kind of hear your parents raise those concerns, but you kind of dispelling the myths.
Can you share a fond memory from your upbringing that highlights your background, your heritage?
Yeah, so one of the things that I had in my upbringing was you are, ethnically Chinese, but you're born in a Canadian society, and you're very influenced by Western pop culture. So there was a time in the early 2000s when there was a rapper named Jin Aoyang, Jin the MC. So he went on something called Freestyle Fridays, which is on BET, Black Entertainment Television, and he won it. He basically beat 5 people to win the title of Best Freestyle Rapper, and and then got signed by Rough Rider Records right after that. And for us as a culture, that was a moment because being this hybrid of your cultural background of being Chinese, which is very reserved and not really necessarily in Western mainstream entertainment, and seeing this young guy go out there and literally destroy all his opponents in his path to get this title was just an absolutely remarkable memory from my childhood, and very inspirational. And I look at other similar things that have happened in our community, such as Jeremy Lin and his Linsanity run in 2012, where a guy who looked like us was going out there going head to head with Kobe Bryant and scores 38 points on him in Madison Square Garden. That was another huge milestone, in our community, and we continue to look forward to, any of these types of, events, because they do inspire and stay in the back of your head. And I think it's really great for the next generation to be able to see that.
What's one thing you wish more people knew about your culture?
I think in our culture, there's a misconception, and I'm speaking specifically about Chinese, that there's a misconception around the fact that we're not athletic. I think it kind of goes back to a lot of the traditional structures of where the society came from. So when there's new immigrants that come to a country, a lot of times the parents are just finding ways to survive, and athletics is seen as sort of a pastime or a hobby, but academics is your path to kind of get out of the situation and kind of elevate your family situation. And I think that that doesn't necessarily mean that the individual is unathletic. It just means that it was deprioritized as part of their upbringing. And similarly, for a lot of people that are in, for instance, China, there's a lot of great athletes playing a lot of individual sports, but when it comes to Western sports, they weren't necessarily getting the coaching infrastructure to be able to really succeed. And where we're seeing it change right now is that the East, all over the East has basically opened up for opportunities for the West to do cross-pollination for culture, for training. So you see a lot of athletes from Asia coming to the U.S. to train, and flip-flop. You'll see a lot of Western players going to Asia to play in different types of pro leagues and things like that. And I think that type of cross-pollination will help to kind of improve the diversity of the athletes. But it has always been stereotypical that the Asian community is not necessarily as athletic as, say, some of their other community counterparts. And I think that I definitely see the tides changing as a result of things like the internet and an openness to accept other approaches on athleticism.
Are there any specific athletes that you look up to?
Yeah, so if I look at Asian athletes and those that I kind of really look up to, Jeremy Lin is absolutely at the top of my list, mainly because he is someone that looks like us, and to see him compete at the highest level, I think that was very inspirational for our community. And the fact that he is Asian North American, I think that was a really cool period in time. Preceding him, Yao Ming was definitely somebody that we also had a lot of pride behind. Now, none of us can be 7'4", but what we loved about Yao was the fact that he kind of presented himself similarly to the way that we present ourselves culturally. So Shaq would trash talk him, but he wouldn't trash talk him back, but he would show it on the court and do it in his very humble manner. And I think that a lot of us felt like that was us, and that is how we approached, life. So similarly to Yao, Zach Eady, currently in the NCAA, also had a similar approach in terms of he definitely was a lot more quiet and reserved. But what I loved about him was in the recent NCAA Final Four, in this post-game interview, he was calling out all the coaches that didn't recruit him and telling the public about how people didn't know that they were a bunch of winners. And to see someone that outspoken, to go from someone who was as reserved as he was, seeing that evolution in his personality, a lot of us were like, I wish I could talk like that. I wish I could stand up for myself like that. And to have him do it, I think was also something that very much resonated with us. So those would be 3 basketball athletes. And the other one I could think of off the top of my head would be a tennis player named Michael Chang. So this is back in the 80s or 90s, where he was the first Asian American to ever win a major, a tennis major, as a 5'7" tennis player going against these 6'2" guys, and to see him win the French Open, running around to the point where he had cramps, he couldn't overhand serve anymore, is serving underhand, and he basically won the tournament. So to see that as a young kid growing up in Toronto was very inspirational, because he's very relatable, and to see him be at the peak of a mainstream sport like that, I think was really inspirational.
What's your favorite aspect of being part of your community?
One of the favorite aspects of being part of my community, and something that I hope passes on to the next generation, is that in the Chinese community, there is a lot of focus on respecting and taking care of your elders. So as a selfish perspective, I'm hoping my kids take care of me when I get older. But on the flip side of it, it's really neat, because as I've aged, and now I'm switching roles with my father, where I'm helping to take care of him, it makes you have great appreciation for how much your parents sacrificed to help you get to where you are. And so you want to pay the respect back to them for their efforts. And I think that that is something that lies very strongly within our community, and something that I'm really proud of, and something that I hope that our future generations carry on with them as well.
Who's a notable figure from your background who's inspired you, and why?
Someone who's been really inspiring to me, specifically coming from Toronto, would be the actor Simu Liu. So you're talking about a guy who went down the traditional path and was an accountant, and did a lot of the corporate things, but realized that that was not his passion. But for him to have the bravery to step away from that and to take on that challenge head on, and literally land a 1 in 100 million opportunity where he's now a Marvel Avenger, that has been very inspirational. But more than the success, it's the fact that he has arrived there, recently starring in Barbie, having a bunch of movies about to come out. But it's the fact that he cares about the Toronto community and wants to give back. And that's where we work with him very closely to deploy, a platform every summer where he comes back to speak to kids about his upbringing, how you pursue your passions, and most importantly, how you deal with the adversity of not being able to succeed right away, and some of the tips and tricks that he's gone through to kind of work through that both mentally and physically. And when a guy who's gotten to the level that he's gotten to is willing to come back to the community, I think that for me is very inspirational.
Can you describe a place in Canada where you feel a strong connection to your roots?
Yeah, a place in Toronto that I feel a very strong connection to my roots would be Markham. So this is very stereotypical, like everywhere you drive around in Markham, you're either going to see someone that is Chinese or from the South Asian community. But I think that it's very fun to have these different cultural enclaves in Toronto, because it's almost like being transported to another world. So you can go to these different communities and you can experience the authentic, cultures and foods and traditions in these areas, and then you can go right back into, central downtown where, it's very mainstream. And so to come up to Markham, I bring a lot of my friends from the US up there, and they're just blown away how they feel like they're in an Asian city when it's not. It's like, oh, you feel like going to Korea? We're going to drive 2 kilometers over to Yonge and Finch, and now you're going to feel like you've been dropped into Korea. And I think that that's what makes the city very unique and definitely allows us to immerse, in the culture locally.
What traditions from your heritage do you want to pass down to your family?
So passing tradition generation to generation in Canada has been increasingly difficult because when your parents came here, their native language was, for instance, Chinese. But for them to transfer that to me, where I'm not necessarily operating in my day-to-day in Chinese, it is definitely difficult because I don't practice as much. So now that I have two young daughters that are growing up in Toronto and trying to help maintain their heritage, the language is not necessarily the first thing I can deliver to them, but what I can deliver to them is food and festival. And the way I look at it is that I can get them to eat dumplings, I can get them to eat noodles, and they will ask me the questions of why are these noodles different than the other noodles? I could say, well, this is a ceremonial noodle, it's longer because it's supposed to signify long life. It's like, why are we sitting here folding dumplings, with the family? Well, that's because this is a time-honored tradition that has been kind of passed down through, through generations. And so these are the kind of things that I'm looking to pass through to them, but also allowing them to define what their cultural experience is going to be like in this current generation, especially since there's a lot of children of mixed heritage, mixed race heritage that are in our Canadian society. What is their experience and how do we celebrate, what they are and kind of the new culture that they're going to create, from being special. And I think that that's where we have a big focus on that in our organization of how do we validate and celebrate this new generation and how they're defining their stories and their path forward. To still be respectful of what has come in the past, but also to encourage them to say that you can write your own story. Well, that's what we sit here with the agencies like all day long because we're working on that rebrand. Yeah. And that's the thing, like we focus group all these people that grew up here. And the thing is like, they're like, yeah, like our parents did all this stuff, but we don't want to be computer programmers. Like we kind of want to be on YouTube. So our whole thing is like similarly to my generation where my parents were like, you can't play basketball. There's nothing you could do with basketball. I don't want that barrier for them if they want to do YouTube or streaming or something like that. But how do you make it constructive for them so they're not all putting their eggs in a basket trying to be a YouTuber, but saying YouTube or streaming is a way forward, but like how can we help you to be as successful as you can in that domain, and how can you leverage that maybe not as a job but to influence the world and to kind of like make differences and stuff like that. So those are the kind of things that we're working on shaping, because a lot of the traditional cultural groups like in the Chinese and South Asian community, they're more based on the preservation of the existing culture, which is cool, but we just realized that that wasn't who we are. And like these guys here are like pioneering all these new ways of doing things, and we're like, but nobody's necessarily archiving that. And it's important to archive it because you want to show young people that, look at, this was the blueprint to become an actor. So not saying everyone can do it, but just giving an example that it can be done. Like there's people who have done this, right? So I think that that's what we're busy working on, trying to change a bit.